I used to believe that every mistake came with a lesson. That if you suffered enough, if you reflected deeply enough, eventually the pain would transform into wisdom and the wisdom would justify everything you'd lost along the way. I don't believe that anymore. Some decisions don't come with lessons. Some decisions just come with consequences. And the hardest part isn't the consequence itself, it's learning to live in the permanent shadow of a choice you made with the certainty that you were doing the right thing. My name is irrelevant. What matters is this: I cut my mother out of my life when I was 29 years old. I blocked her number, removed her from social media, and returned her letters unopened. I made that decision after years of what I can only describe as slow emotional erosion, a childhood full of criticism disguised as love, a young adulthood full of guilt weaponized into control. I made that decision clearly, deliberately. And I do not regret the reasoning. But the thing they don't tell you about cutting someone out of your life, the thing no self-help book about toxic relationships fully prepares you for, is that the relationship doesn't actually end. It just transforms. It moves from something external into something you carry entirely inside yourself. My mother died 14 months after I cut contact. Heart attack. She was 58 years old. The call came from my aunt, who I barely knew, on a Tuesday afternoon when I was eating lunch at my desk and thinking about nothing more significant than whether I'd remembered to send a work email. She said, "Your mother is gone." And I sat there holding my phone, and I felt something I still don't have a word for. It wasn't grief, exactly. Or rather, it wasn't the grief I'd expected to feel. It was more complicated than that. It was grief folded inside relief, folded inside guilt, folded inside anger, and then below all of that, something cold and silent that I'd been sitting with ever since. The last words I ever said to my mother were, "I can't do this anymore." That's it. That's the final line of our relationship. And I have turned those 6 words over in my mind 10,000 times, not because I said them, I think I had to say them, but because of everything I never said after. Here's what I know about irreversible decisions: we don't feel their full weight in the moment we make them. We feel a version of the weight, we feel the significance, the gravity, the sense that something is shifting permanently. But we don't feel the full thing. We can't. Because the full weight of a permanent decision only becomes available to you over time, as all the futures that could have existed slowly close off, one by one, and you're left standing in the only timeline that actually happened. I never got to have the conversation I was saving for later. The one where I finally told her what she'd done to me, not in anger, not in the heat of a phone call where she would deflect and twist and reframe, but calmly, precisely, with the clarity of someone who had done the work. I was going to have that conversation someday. I had always assumed there was time. There wasn't time. And here is where it gets psychologically interesting, and I say that because I've had to become clinical about it, detached, in order to survive it. The conversation I was saving wasn't really about changing anything. I know that now. My mother was never going to say the things I needed to hear. She didn't have that in her. What I wanted wasn't an apology that would arrive, what I wanted was the possibility of one. I wanted to keep that door cracked, even while I kept her on the other side of it. When she died, the door didn't just close. It disappeared. The wall where the door had been became solid and permanent, and there is no knocking on it now. 14 months. That's how much time passed between my last words to her and her last breath. I have calculated what I could have done in those 14 months if I'd tried. 12 or 13 phone calls, maybe. A few letters. A visit, possibly, if I had been brave enough. I chose not to be brave. I chose protection. And I don't know if that was wrong. That's the thing I've had to make peace with, not knowing. Not being able to know. The psychological burden of an irreversible decision is that you can never run the other scenario. You can never see what would have happened if you'd called her back. Maybe she would have used it against you. Maybe it would have set you back years in your healing. Maybe, though, maybe something would have shifted. You'll never know. I've been in therapy for 2 years now, processing this. My therapist talks about the difference between decisions that are wrong and decisions that are incomplete. She says sometimes we make choices that are the best available to us at the time, with the information and the capacity we have, and those choices can still have devastating consequences. That doesn't make them wrong. It makes them human. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it are two completely different experiences. I still dream about her sometimes. Not fond dreams, there's no soft-focus nostalgia happening in my subconscious. In the dream she's usually in the middle of doing something ordinary, cooking, reading, driving. And I'm watching her from a distance, and I want to say something, but I never can. I wake up with a weight in my chest that takes most of the morning to lift. What I've learned, or what I'm still learning, is that grief for a complicated person is itself complicated. You can grieve someone and still know, with full certainty, that they caused you real harm. Those two truths can exist simultaneously. They don't cancel each other out. And irreversible decisions, I've come to understand, require a different kind of relationship with regret than ordinary mistakes. Ordinary mistakes offer the possibility of correction. You can apologize. You can try again. You can close the gap between who you were and who you want to be through action. With irreversible decisions, you can't act your way out of them. You can only integrate them. You carry them differently over time, not lighter, exactly, but more evenly distributed. Less sharp. I think about her differently now than I did in those first months after she died. I've moved past the frozen horror of the initial grief and into something more complex and more honest. I can see her now as a full person. Someone who was also damaged. Someone who was also doing her best with a broken set of tools, even when her best was nowhere near enough. That doesn't rewrite the past. It doesn't heal the specific wounds of a specific childhood. But it allows me to hold her as a human being instead of only as the source of my pain. There are things I wish I'd said. There are things I wish I'd heard. Neither of those wishes will ever be satisfied, and I've had to learn to want things I cannot have, without letting that wanting swallow me. This is the part no one tells you about the decisions you can't undo. They don't ask you to move on. They ask you to move forward. And there's a real difference. Moving on implies leaving something behind. Moving forward means carrying it, carrying all of it, while still choosing, somehow, to go somewhere. I don't know what the right decision was. I've stopped trying to calculate it. What I know is this: I made the decision that felt most survivable to me at the time. And I am still surviving it. And some days, that is enough. If you are standing at a crossroads with someone you love and someone who hurts you, because sometimes those are the same person, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to say cut them out or hold on. That is yours to navigate, and anyone who tells you it's simple has never actually been there. What I will say is this: think about the conversations you're saving for later. Think about the words you're holding back because you're waiting for the right moment or the right version of the person or the right version of yourself. Sometimes later doesn't come. And you live in the silence that's left. There is a question I get asked sometimes, when I tell pieces of this story: do you regret cutting her off? I've sat with that question for a long time. And my honest answer is, I regret that it was the only option I had left. I regret that the relationship had eroded to a place where the only survivable path was a hard boundary. I regret that we never found, or were never given the tools to find, some other way through. But do I regret the decision itself, given what the relationship had cost me? I genuinely don't know. And I've made peace with not knowing. What I do know is that cutting someone off is not an ending. That's the thing I wish someone had told me before I did it, not to talk me out of it, but to prepare me. When you remove someone from your life, they don't disappear from your internal world. They just stop having any new information to add to it. They stay exactly as they were on the last day you spoke, frozen at that age, in that mood, in that version of themselves. While you continue to grow and change and become someone who might have had a different conversation with them, if there had been time. My mother is frozen for me at 57. Her last letter, unopened. Her last phone call, unanswered. That version of her, difficult, complicated, wounded, limited, is the only one I'll ever know. And sometimes I wonder who she might have been at 60. At 65. Whether age would have shifted anything. Whether distance might have eventually produced something that proximity never could. I will never know. That's the price. Not regret, exactly. More like permanent uncertainty about a road you'll never see the end of. What I've learned is that you can make the right decision for yourself and still grieve the alternative. You can protect your own well-being and still carry the weight of what that protection cost. Those aren't contradictions, they're the full truth of what this kind of decision actually contains. And carrying the full truth, without simplifying it in either direction, without making yourself a hero of self-preservation or a villain of abandonment, is the only honest way through. I'm still working on it. I probably always will be.